Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second round of a series that I'm doing on Aristotle's politics. If you missed the first episode, please go and check that out because this one is building on that, continuing on that conversation, the summary. So basically, what I'm doing is that I'm reading Aristotle's politics. I'm summarizing the key themes. I am analyzing it. I'm also deriving some conclusions, parallels to the modern world. So if that sounds interesting, go check the first video as well and subscribe, comment, like in the video. Uh, I'm going to read them all and also take a look at them also. Really appreciate you going along with this journey. So, okay, in the first episode, we talked about how Aristotle creates his theory of natural hierarchies. How first there is a household, and then there is a village, and then there is a city as a natural end for humans. And then we talked about why he considers man as a political animal. We said that it's because Aristotle considers human beings different from other animals in a way that humans are capable of making judgments, making decisions, creating cities, households. So in a way, it requires deliberation, use of the soul, and that differentiates humans from other animals, and that makes human a political animal. And then we talked about how Aristotle sees slavery, what he means by slavery, and clarified all those concepts there as well. Today we are going to conclude book one, and book one is concluded by Aristotle's remarks on economics, economic life, how commerce emerges, and he makes a lot of parallels to what he discussed beforehand in the natural progression from household, village to city, and then he links this to the emergence of the commerce, art of making money. So today we are basically going to touch upon those topics: how money emerges, what's the role of commerce in city life, in community life, and why we have exchange of goods, trade in the first place. And some interesting concept, whether it is natural to seek profit, whether it is natural to seek more than what you need, what he calls sustenance for necessity. And very interestingly, he concludes the book by returning back to the topics that he mentioned, he talked about in the previous chapters. Again, hierarchies, natural hierarchies. So it will be interesting to address some questions. For example, is the endless pursuit of wealth unnatural? What did Aristotle think money was really for? And can an economy without limits still serve human needs? So these are the topics that we are going to focus on today, and we will conclude book one of Politics by Aristotle. So let's begin. Before we start, it is very helpful to remind us ourselves about the key philosophy of Aristotelian logic, Aristotelian understanding of the world, and that is everything has a purpose, as we mentioned before. That dominates this philosophy. Like in every field that he touches upon, there is this understanding that is given, that is accepted, that we should also keep in mind. Everything has a purpose. Everything has an end. If there is something that exists in nature, whether that's a city, whether that's a government, whether that's a nation, there is probably a need for it. There is probably a purpose attached to it. Doesn't matter it's a human being, doesn't matter it's an animal, doesn't matter it's a tool or anything. So whatever we see has a purpose. Nothing exists in a vain. So that's the key understanding of Aristotelian philosophy. Given that, we can jump straight into the topic. Okay, this part of the conversation starts with this question that Aristotle posts: whether the art of getting goods, art of obtaining something, obtaining goods, is the same as household management. And if they are not the same, which one is subordinate to which part? Again, this is very similar to what we discussed before. As you can see, whenever Aristotle touches upon these topics, he's trying to identify hierarchy. Which one comes first, which one is more important, and which one is less important. And we see it here as well. And then he reached the conclusion that no, it is clear that household management is not the same as the art of getting goods, because one is related to supply of things. Art of getting goods is about supply, and household management is about using these things. So these things are fundamentally different. And then he says, okay, all living beings, whether they are animals or human beings, they need sustenance to sustain their lives. They need this to survive, basically, because if you don't have a sustenance to sustain your life, you will basically perish. You will not be able to live your life. And then he says the differences in sustenance have made the ways of life of animals different. What do we mean by that? Some animals eat plants, some prefer meat, some prefer fish. So, but as a result, what is pleasant for one living being is not pleasant might not necessarily be the same level of pleasantness for the other living being. And then it applies to the human beings as well. Some people prefer different types of sustenance, and that's how they live their lives. So there is a lot of diversity in terms of sustenance that one living being needs, and that's not the human beings and animals alike. They are no exception for this. But then, as a result, the ways of life for human beings as well as animals are very different depending on this. Some people end up as nomads, some end up as farmers, as fisher, as hunter. So societies are different based on the level of sustenance that they seek. And this is about those human beings that get these things by self-generated work without any commerce. So in this scenario, there is no trade, there is no commerce. The first instinct of this living being, let's call it human, is to take a look at the nature, see what they need from the nature, and take it and create something out of it, so that they can sustain themselves and they can live their lives. So at this stage, there is no need for commerce or trade or anything. This is the state of nature, let's call it. And then Aristotle makes a very general claim, one claim that is probably not popular these days. He says plants exist for the sake of animals, and that the other animals exist for the sake of human beings. The tame animals both for use and sustenance, and most, if not all, of the wild animals for sustenance and other assistance, in order that clothing and other instruments may be got from them. If then nature makes nothing that is incomplete or purposeless, nature must necessarily have made all of these for the sake of human beings. Again, we return back to the basic principle. Everything that exists in the nature has a purpose. If there is a plant, if there is a wild animal, if there is a tamed animal that exists as we see it, there is a purpose to it. That they exist as a means to something. And here Aristotle concludes, okay, at the end of the day, at the top of the hierarchy, these all serve human beings. Human beings, as we discussed in the previous episode, are the political animals. Compared to all the other beings, they use their soul compared to body the most. They are the most rational of all the living beings that exist in the nature. And as a result, all the plants, animals, wild animals, tamed animals, they serve the needs of human beings. There are two principles to understand here. First is Aristotle's insistence, let's say, or look for identifying hierarchies, and also this understanding that everything exists for purpose. So if you combine them together, you get this idea that there is a natural hierarchy in the nature. Plants, wild animals, tame animals, and at the top, human beings. Think of it this way. Plants are the least rational beings. Okay, wild animals, they may have some rationality. Okay, they may need to anticipate something, but it's very limited. Okay, but then tamed animals, they are much rational compared to wild animals because they are tamed, they are domesticated, they serve some rational human needs, transportation, for clothing purposes, getting the food and everything. But at the top of this pyramid, we have human beings. So we can see for how it ends up in this structure where level of rationality decides means and end. Okay, all these beings are means to human end. Let's call it this way. So that's a very human-centric nature. It says everything is made for the human beings. To summarize, here in the nature itself, when you look at the nature, naturally what happens is that uh, human beings or other animals, they seek sustenance to sustain their lives, and they prefer to be as self-sufficient as much as possible to survive so that they don't need anything else. So that's the natural state where they try to get the goods. They for example wake up, they're hungry, they go and hunt, or they go to farm and collect the results of their farming, their fruits, vegetables, animals, milk, whatever. So that's the natural state of getting good. So that's how usually human beings operate, and that's the ideal stage where you don't need any trade, you don't need any commerce. You have your own household. You go hunt, you go to fish and collect your fish and then eat, and that's how you survive basically. But then we slowly enter into the discussion of commerce, how commerce emerges. He says there is another sort of getting goods that is called art of making money, where there is said to be no limit to wealth and property. This is in contrast to what we discussed before in the state of nature, where people would go hunt, would go fish, and they would sustain their lives. This was because of nature's needs, demands. But the art of making money is more about getting experience. Let's call it manipulating some art to increase the possession as much as possible. Okay, let's take a step down and give an analogy that Aristotle himself uses. Every possession has double use, proper and improper, or we can call natural or unnatural. Let's consider shoes. You can either wear them or trade them. You can either make them to wear or you can make them to trade. Okay, if you are making shoes so to trade them, that is unnatural way of shoe. Shoe did not exist for the sake of trade. Shoe exists for the sake of wearing them. Again, this goes back to the main idea of Aristotle, where it has been taken for granted that everything has a purpose. So shoes' purpose is to be worn by other human beings. We can't say that shoes' purpose is to be sold to the other human beings so that they can wear them, but that's unnatural because that's not the first starting point. So in a way, the natural proper use of possession is what the thing is for. The improper use is what you can do with it, but you shouldn't treat it as its natural purpose. And wearing shoes is a proper use, but trading it for profit, is the improper use. So this logic can be applied to all things, as most things can be traded. Most possessions that human beings make can be traded. Some people have more or less of what they require, so they need to engage in trading to enable their sustenance. So, therefore, commerce and the art of making money is not the same. Farmer is necessary for survival. But here again, we come back to the topic of what is relevant in what type of human community development. In the household, there is no need for commerce because everyone shares everything. Let's call it a very traditional family with mother, father, husband, and wife, and then kids. They share everything basically food, sometimes clothing. And then let's also consider that Aristotle lived in ancient Greece, where probably it was very traditional, it was very common that household members would share things naturally with one another without much privacy. But once people live in different households, once we go to the village and city from household, then these households need to engage in trade to enable their survival. So, and then he says this sort of exchange and money making is natural because uh, it results from natural need. Okay, in the household, you live in the household, you share everything with the family members. You don't need to trade, you don't need to commerce or anything. So there is no need for commerce in this place. You go fish, you go with the family, you grow some fruits, vegetables in the farm, and you have your cow, you get the milk. In that scenario, in the household, there is no need for trade. But once households grow into villages and then cities, once it starts growing, there is a need for trade because people make different things, produce different things, and you can't, in that scenario, you are better off if you trade with the other people what you make. Uh, for example, if you produce something in excess, you can sell it in exchange for something that you lack, and that you will be better off as a household in that scenario. So, in that sense, money making and trading associated with this is natural because again it's about self-sufficiency. It's about getting sustenance that you need to be self-sufficient, and that makes it natural, and that's the purpose of money. So first, when societies arose, they used to do barters. They would exchange things. Let's say I make shoes and the other person makes a hat or coat. So I make in excess shoes because I am more of an expert in shoemaking, and the other person makes an coats in excess. Okay, I give my shoe to that person, excess shoe that I don't need for self sustenance, and that person gives me back coats in return. So in this case, we don't need the money; we just do the barters. But as societies grew, as households grew into villages and then to cities, money was invented as a form of exchange. And money, in this sense, decides the cost of the thing by the size and weight of the barter object. So money first arose as a necessity, but then it turned into art of how to trade in order to make the highest profit. So, and for this way, there is no limit to how much wealth you can accumulate once you master this art of trading. Because now you're not bartering uh, the objects, possessions. You have this thing called money as a form of exchange. And now you start to think of clever ways where you can master this trade to increase your accumulation of money. And here Aristotle makes a distinction. Wealth and money making associated with household management and later community building is done by nature because of the need to sustain oneself, a household. But the art of making limitless money is contrary to the nature because it is done by exploiting certain art where money making itself becomes the goal, not the self sustenance. So, okay, to summarize, let's go back. Uh, Human beings need sustenance to live. That's a need. Um, at the household level, you don't need to trade with others. You just go farm, you hunt, and then you get your sustenance, and then you live happily ever after without needing to trade. But okay, as we discussed in the first episode, where we said uh, development from household to village and then to city is natural end. But then what happens is that when households get extended to the village and then they get extended to the city, in order to obtain self-sufficiency, self-sufficient and better life, they start engaging in trade. They sell to one another what they make in excess. But again, this is very natural because all of this is done with the aim of attaining that end of self-sufficiency. Remember from the first episode where we said that city is a self-sufficient entity, and that's why it's the end goal. So if you trade, if you make money with if you engage in commerce in a goal of attaining self-sufficiency for all the households that exist in the city, that's natural. But then if you take this into art, where you start thinking about how can you accumulate your wealth limitlessly, then it becomes unnatural. Whereas ideally, you should have a more natural end. And he considers this natural end as self-sustenance and self-sufficiency. If you have what you need, then that's it. But then any extra wealth accumulation that you are trying to do is unnatural, because here the purpose is just to make more money, and that becomes the end goal. So natural wealth making is what is needed for self-sufficiency and survival: food, shelter, tools, etc. Unnatural wealth making is money becomes an end in itself, accumulated without limit. Okay, what Aristotle, I think, feared was the detachment of money from purpose. Yeah. For him, economics should serve the household and the city, not dominate them. The idea that wealth should be unlimited was to him unnatural and dangerous. So he wasn't against making profits, he wasn't against making money, but he basically, again, linked this to his overall philosophy of thing existing for the sake of something else. So you make money so that you sustain your family, sustain your life, sustain to have a better life, basically. If that's your goal, if that's the end purpose that you are trying to attain, okay, fine. Go ahead and make as much profit as you need, as you want to make. But if you don't have any purpose, but you are just saying, okay, I just want to make money, I don't care, I don't have any other purpose but just to make money, says that's unnatural, that cannot exist. Underlying all this is this belief that everything in nature has a telos, a purpose. And when we ignore this purpose, when money becomes the goal rather than the means, we go against the nature. That could be the best summary here. That if you try to attain money, profit for an end goal that you have, if money is a means to some other end, then that's natural. But if you are trying to attain money, profit without any purpose, without any end goal, then money making becomes the end goal itself. Because everything in nature, remember, has a goal, has an end. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. And if you're creating money without any purpose, that means you're just creating it for the sake of creating it. That doesn't make sense at all. Then Aristotle starts thinking about Thales, a famous scientist, philosopher that lived way before Aristotle. And he was a very rich man. Then he talks about Thales using his knowledge of astronomy to get rich, since he understood when crops would emerge the best and in most profitable time. He said doing this, he demonstrated that philosophers can also get rich if they knew how to use their knowledge for money making, but they usually do not aim at this. So he's a bit being ironic here. He's saying all these people, philosophers, scientists, complaining that we can't make money. We attain our lives to making attain our lives to making people wise, but then we end up broke, we end up poor. But he's saying no. Actually, Thales, who was a prominent scientist, he actually used his knowledge about astronomy to basically manipulate the market, they established monopoly, because all the other people didn't know how to anticipate when crops would grow the most. But he did, he knew it, and then he created a business basically. And he's saying, okay, you can become a rich uh, using this goal. It is not really true that uh, you have to live a poor life just because you are trying to seek knowledge. There are ways to make money as well if you are knowledgeable enough. He also makes a very interesting case here about monopolies. Says one of the end goals of one of the not the end goals, or one of the byproducts of this art of making money is that you also figure out how to create a monopoly. Monopoly meaning that only you in the market have a supply of certain thing, certain good, certain service. He says this is a tool that political rulers, should have at their hand, at their toolbox. Uh, it is one of the ways that they can raise revenue if they need it. So he's saying this is a good, useful art for political rulers to know about and possibly to attain, to utilize in the future if they need it. So that's basically the economic aspect of Aristotelian philosophy. To summarize, we can say it in the following way. Okay, uh, in the nature, usually human beings and all the other animals attain for self-sufficient life. And if they are just households without going further into village and city, in this context, there is no need for trade, because they may go hunt animals, they may go fish, they may go grow farm, and they, in this way, they can attain their needs to become self-sufficient, to sustain themselves. But then, as we know from the previous discussion, that humanity inevitably moves from household to village and then to the city, at some point this is going to happen. And when that happens, because city is a natural end goal, because city is the most self-sufficient entity where people can trade and get get the things that they can make basically, and that makes a better life. And that's why household will ultimately grow into city. And then he says, as households grow into villages and then to cities, the need for commerce and trade arises. Okay, shoemaking, uh, purpose of the shoe is to wear them. But in the city, in the context of city, it is natural that you make it in an excess so that you can also sell it to the other people, so that you can get something else that you might need. So as households grow into villages and as villages grow into cities, the need for commerce and trade arises. And people trade and make money, and then that's how that's how basically commerce and trade and money emerges. But then he says, uh, at some point, this turns into art, whereas previously you would trade in order to get the things that you needed, so to sustain your life. But then at some point, money may lose its purpose, where it may become an end in itself. And that's unnatural when money loses its purpose. And perhaps surprisingly, after discussion about economics, he comes back to the topic of natural hierarchies that we previously discussed. He says there are three forms of household ruling: mastery rule, marital rule, and paternal rule. Mastery rule is over what he calls slaves. Marital rule is most likely he refers to rule of husbands over wives. Remember, we are talking about ancient Greece, where women are not allowed to vote, obtain properties. We need to keep that context in mind. So that's the context where Aristotle is writing about these ideas. And the third is paternal rule, rule over children. Here, he's saying that inequality is justified by differences in reason and virtue. From the previous discussion, previous episode, we know how Aristotle justified the existence of slavery, although not in a way that existed in the history. He said that okay, almost from the start, some people gravitate towards ruling, some people gravitate towards ruled element, body and a soul. Soul rules over the body because through soul we decide, we make judgments, we contemplate, we make decisions, we discuss about the meaning of justice, meaning of life, but the body is just a body function, physical work. So he's saying, in that sense, if there is a human being that lacks this soul part, such an extent, they are naturally well off being ruled by the masters. So in a way, master rule is rule over slaves. You can call it despotic way of ruling, where master would command slave to do something and then slave would just obey. Okay, the second rule, marital rule. He most likely refers this to rule over wife. It is not despotic because woman has rational capacity just like man. But according to Aristotle, again, I'm not claiming that this is the case today. According to how he sees it in that historical context, is that okay, woman has rational capacity, but man uh, because they are more capable, they are considered more capable. And most interestingly, paternal rule, rule over children, is kingly rule. So here he makes a very interesting distinction, very, very interesting, that I think is worth noticing. He says, rule over children should be kingly rule, kingly. He says this kingly rule is rule over equals, equals in rational capacity, equals in the understanding of the world and everything. But age grants authority. So in a sense, this is, he says, for by nature the king should be different, but he should be of the same stock. And this is the case of the elder in relation to the younger, and the begetter to the child. So father and a child, or let's make Aristotelian philosophy relevant for the 21st century. Let's say mother and the child. Doesn't matter. Let's forget about the genders here. They are the same. They are the same human beings. They have the same rational capacity. They are equal in terms of understanding of the world, IQ and everything, very similar. But only difference here is the age. Age grants authority to the parents, and that's why parents should rule in a kingly fashion. King is of the same stock, but they are more superior because they are more experienced, and that's why they need to guide these little kids, basically. So that's about it for today's episode about Aristotelian understanding of economics and also some hierarchies that exist in a household. If you liked it, consider subscribing, commenting, liking the video, sharing it with your friends. I will keep doing these episodes more often in the future, continuing with the next chapters of the book. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed listening. And again, if some of the concepts seemed a little bit different, hard to grasp, be sure to check out the first video that I made, because most of the concepts that I talk about here builds upon those ideas that I explored in the first video. But I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day and see you in the next rounds.